everybody doing tonight?
Good, brother.
This side's a little heavier than this side tonight. They shifted to this side. It's good to see everybody out and waiting for God to fill up all these empty seats, and we follow God's guidance and always depend on Him. That's what we'll be seeing. So let's keep working toward that goal. We're talking this morning about giving, and we're looking at oxen and how they were used in the Bible for God's purpose, for sacrifices, and we'll get right into our next verse. We got to Proverbs 14:4. So Proverbs 14, God's contrasting wisdom and folly through that chapter. In verse 4 it says, "Where no oxen are, the crib is clean, but much increase is by the strength of the ox." So what does this proverb tell us? Well, we know something about oxen. They're big animals. They can weigh up to 2 to even 3,000 pounds. So they would eat a lot, make a lot of waste also. So if you want to keep your barn clean and the crib, the feed trough clean, how do you do that? Well, you can just not have an ox. But if the farmer didn't have an ox, what's he going to do when it comes time to plow? He might be out there by himself pulling the plow or using a hoe. He won't be able to.
He'll be looking for an ox.
Yeah, he won't have much of a crop. So if you don't put out the effort to do the day-to-day work, then you're not going to get the end results. So there's a truth that about productivity, and so there's necessary messiness that's often accompanies meaningful work. So don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. So for working for God or just working out in the fields, if you don't do anything, yeah, you'll stay clean, but if the farmer didn't have the oxen, he wouldn't be able to plant his crops, and he wouldn't have a mess to clean up all year, but he wouldn't have anything to eat all winter either, so could end up starving. So let's make sure that we put out the effort to work for God, and that's what I learned from that proverb. Anybody else have any comments about that proverb?
Pretty much the way it is. You don't, if you like everything nice, clean all the time, and like you just want something to look at.
Yes.
Go by, and then you don't get one thing out of it. You go dig your potatoes, and ain't no potatoes to dig.
Yeah.
So we get out what we put in.
Yeah, so that's right. We get out what we put in. So let's put in a lot of work for God, because He's already done so much for us, as we've already talked about. But this proverb leads us right into another farmer that God's going to call, a guy named Elisha. He's a farmer, and God calls him to leave his farm, and so he leaves this laborious work of farming just to jump right into the consuming work of being a prophet. So he's still got lots to do, even though he's no longer a farmer. And we'll see next week, God's going to call Jesus will call fishermen. He calls a lot of different people, because everybody can do something. So you might think, well, I'm not a preacher type, or maybe I'm not a teacher, but there's plenty of stuff to do. We talked about the working we need to have around the church here. We can do stuff inside, we can do stuff outside, but there's always everything you can do for God is great. Doing the Great Commission is the best thing that we can do, but all these other things are important also. So we need to be about our Father's business, and that's what Elijah's going to do when he leaves his farming. Martin Luther, the leader of the Protestant Reformation, talking about calling and contentment, he said, "Next to faith, this is the highest art, to become content with the calling in which God has placed you." So we need to take that to heart, that what God's called us to do, we need to be working hard, diligently doing it, get your hands dirty, get out of your comfort zone, but don't be discontent. Well, only discontent you should have is, hey, I'm probably not doing enough, so I need to be doing more. So press yourself to do more, but don't fret or worry about, well, this is not the right job for me. If you don't have to think you have the right job, go ask the pastor. I'm sure he can find another job for you to do. He can direct you to something. There's plenty of things to do,
But you gotta be willing.
you have to be willing.
You have to be willing. You want to serve, and you gotta make sure you're doing it right. Like you said, give it all, because everything we do is for the glory of God, and we're just trying to build such a unified, strong family that we can make sure that everything we're here. Our main objective is to help win lost souls and make sure that we're leading them to Jesus, and we gotta make sure that we stay on task with that.
Yeah, 'cause just like in the sermon this morning, if the people walk in and, you know, they don't see the love, you know, number one, they may not walk in, but if they walk in, they might end up just walking out without listening. So they may think, well, these people are just like the people over at Walmart or wherever you might be. We got to be something different. So we got to be set apart, and the world's got to see that love.
Reflection on Brother Wesley, of course.
Yeah. Didn't name any names or anything. Just looking over to this side, but wherever you are, that's true. So in Elijah's calling, his predecessor, who he became, he learned the task of prophecy and everything from, was Elijah. So Elijah, we referred to it this morning, where God sent the fire down after the 3.5 years of no rain. God was going to end it, and we talked about how God sent the fire down to honor Elijah's offering, but he didn't. But the prophets of Baal went first, and they tried everything. You know, they were jumping and shouting and cutting themselves, whatever they did. It didn't. You know, they were talking to a God that wasn't there. They were trying to wake him up, but it didn't work. But God did answer Elijah. Elijah was a great prophet, and he did great things. But as soon as this happens, as soon as God answers by fire, then the 450 prophets of Baal, Elijah, they take them down to the brook Kishon, and they slew them all there. So God's doing some cleaning in Israel right there. These prophets of Baal have caused all this problem. Of course, the Queen Jezebel, she likes them. She was a Baal worshiper, so these were her picked priests technically. So in this case, Jezebel's really upset when she hears this, so she's already killed a lot of the prophets of God. Elijah actually keeps saying, he's kind of complaining, but you know, people, sometimes we kind of feel down and out. He keeps saying, well, I'm the only one left, you know, it's down to me, you know, there's nobody else in all of Israel that's prophet of God. I'm the last believer, I'm the last Christian around here. In today's words, what he was saying. So you ever feel kind of that you're all alone? You know, he should have just went to God, but in this case, God's going to come to him, and that's where we'll get to start our lesson. Actually, we're going to back up a little bit. It starts in 1 Kings 19, 14 through 21, but we're going to back up to verse 12. So it says, and after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire, and after the fire, a still small voice. So we've heard about this still small voice. So first God sends a whirlwind or a tornado that even breaks up rocks. So it's a big windstorm. But God wasn't in the windstorm. Then an earthquake. Earthquake again, it's a great shaking of the ground, but God wasn't in that. And then there was this fire, and God wasn't in that. He wasn't any of those three big visible things, but here comes the still small voice. So he's going to talk to, in this case, Elijah, not in a loud voice, but he's going to talk to him quietly. And it says, and it was so when Elijah heard it, that he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood in the entering of the cave. Because he was in a cave, he was hiding from Jezebel, because she again said, well, I'm going to kill him. You killed my prophets, I'm going to kill you. So he'd been hiding out for a while, dodging the queen. And it says, and behold, there came a voice unto him and said, what doest thou here, Elijah? So now God's going to talk to him, because God knew what he was doing. He knows everything, but he wants to get Elijah's response. And that gets us to verse 14. And he said, I have been very jealous for the Lord God of hosts, because the children of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, thrown down thine altars, and slain thy prophets with the sword. And even I, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. So there he is. Even I only am left. So he was feeling, kind of alone. So he was just working, doing all the work, but there wasn't anybody to work with him. And the Lord said unto him, go, return on the way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when thou comest, anoint Hazael to be king over Syria, and Jehu the son of Nimshi shalt thou anoint to be king over Israel, and Elijah the son of Shaphat of Abel-Meholah shalt thou anoint to be the prophet in thy room. So he tells him to do 4 things technically. He says, get out of the cave, go down the mountain, and so anoint anoint this person to be king over Syria, another one to be king over Israel, and he handpicks Elijah to be the person that'll take over his position when he is gone. So it's always good to have people coming up in training to take over your job. So he's telling Elijah, don't fret. Tells him several things here. He's saying, your time's not over. You've got to train a new recruit. You got to name 2 kings. One of them's the king of Israel. So if he names a king of Israel, that means that Jezebel is going out, and King Ahab, so they're going out. That means now there's a new king. So there's some light at the end of the tunnel for him. And then he says, and it shall come to pass that him that escapeth the sword of Hazael shall Jehu slay, and him that escapeth the sword of Jehu shall Elijah slay. So now God's promising a sweeping out of Israel. He's going to cleanse the house, just like all the unnumberable sacrifices that King Solomon had to make to clean up and consecrate the temple holy before they brought in the Ark of the Covenant. That's what God's going to do. He's going to do some house cleaning and sweeping away the evildoers out of Israel. So God has a way of doing that, and that's the reason he said if the one king doesn't get rid of the evildoers, the other king will, and if those 2 kings can't do it, then Elijah can come along and take care of the rest of them. So God says, here's the men to set up to get my job done. Yet then he comforts him more, and he says, yet I have left me 7,000 in Israel, all the knees which have not bowed unto Baal, and every mouth which hath not kissed him. So that's what Baal worshippers would do. They would bow down to the Baal, they would kiss this idol which couldn't do anything for them. But God says, what you've been doing, you may not, he says I'm all alone, so don't think he's been preaching and prophesying and working for God. He doesn't think anything's accomplished. He thinks it's just down to me. All the rest are dead. But here's God says, people have been listening. There's 7,000, that have followed me. They've listened to you. They've listened to maybe other prophets. It wasn't all him, but again, he was the prophet. He thought he was the only prophet left. So definitely had to be encouraging to him that there's 7,000 others that could stand with him. So when you think you're all alone, you always got God. You can go to God, but he has other people, and he wants us to, again, get together with those people and work together. And that's what we need to be doing. Any comments on that first section of verses down through verse 18? So God didn't give him an order. He just said, do these 3 things. So the first thing he does in verse 19, he's going to go find his replacement Elijah, because again, there's 7,000, I'm going to go find one of them, so let's go get one of my tasks done. So he departed thence and found Elijah the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen before him, and he with the 12th. And Elijah passed by him and cast his mantle upon him. So the mantle it's like an outer cloak, but anyway, it's probably made out of animal hair, but it definitely, Elijah understood what it was. It represented the Spirit of God, and when he passed it, threw it on his shoulders, he understood that he was calling him to service, and he understood that the Spirit was going to go with that, and I'm sure he felt that Spirit, when that mantle hit him, so he got his attention. So we can tell from this verse that Elijah was a rich farmer. It says he was, so we think, somebody could say he had, 12, a yoke of oxen is 2 oxen, with a yoke between them, and they can do a lot of pulling, they can do a lot of plowing. Some people say, well, he had 12 of these, he had 24 oxen in front of his plow. It doesn't take 24 oxen to pull a plow. You could probably pull, pretty well whatever tree out of the ground you wanted to. So most likely, and again, it's not greatly relevant, but he was probably plowing with 1 yoke of oxen, and the other 11, again, they was his servants or people working for the farm. This shows it was a big estate. If you have to have 24 oxen to plow your ground, that means you've got a lot of farming going on. It'd be like people having a bunch of big John Deere tractors now to get their work done. So he was a rich man. But the first thing he does several things. It says, and he left the oxen and ran after Elijah and said, let me, I pray thee, kiss my father and my mother, and then I will follow thee. And he said unto him, go back again, for what have I done to thee? So immediately he does some action. He leaves the oxen, and then he runs. He wants to catch up with Elijah to talk to him. He's already made his decision. Again, he knows he's been called, so but he says, let me go back and say goodbye and farewell, kiss my parents, and then I'm going to follow you, because he knew the following was required.
That's right.
Elijah's response was, he allowed him to go back. He says, what have I done to thee? He's pointing out, I didn't call you, God picked you. You know, this is your God's pick. So, I mean, and that's what God does. He doesn't say, you know, he can pick you, but he's not going to make you do the work still. You know, he can pick Jared and say, I got this for you to do, but that doesn't mean he's not going to make Jared do it. Jared's got to make the decision whether he's going to, you know, keep farming or, you know, he made a similar decision. You know, I can pick on Jared because he made a decision. You know, he was doing something and God said, I got something else for you to do, and then he
Called service.
Then he did it. So, but that's exactly what Elijah's doing here. But he says, I know it's going to be a long-term thing, so he's going to say goodbye to his parents, but he's got to make the choice to follow. So he returns, and it says, and he returned back from him and took a yoke of oxen, that's 2, and he slew them and boiled their flesh with the instruments of the oxen and gave unto the people, and they did eat. Then he arose and went after Elijah and ministered unto him. So at that point, he was fully committed, but if you see what he did, he didn't take time to go out and he could cut down trees. He owned, you know, a lot of land. They could have cut down some trees or gone to the wood pile, but he just took, again, what he had there handy, probably the plow, and the yoke was made out of wood, whatever wood he had there, he just took it. Let's have us a fire right here and get things going. So he did it quickly to make again, he made a sacrifice. So when he slew the ox, he was giving up something. He gave up his profession to follow and do what God said. He did follow Elijah, and he ministered to him here, and he does great things after that. He becomes a great prophet of God, and we know a lot of the other story that went with it. But he made the decision to follow. He gave up something. So when we follow God, again, if you're not giving up something, you're probably not all in. You know, he didn't say, you know, let me keep half of my oxen and do half farming. He just went all in and he followed. So, but that's the point there, that he followed God completely. He followed this man that God had already sent the fire down for and had done great miracles. And Elijah at this point, he doesn't know that there's 7,000 out there, but he'll do great things, you know, for God. And he's going into, you know, he's been in the country, so he knows, you know, what's happening with the king and all the idol worship. I'm sure he's heard it, you know, about the, you know, they've been going through a drought. Now the rain's already come, so all these things have happened. So he's mindful of it, and he knows he's in a risky time, but he doesn't care. I mean, guess what? If Jezebel, the queen's out to kill Elijah, what's she going to do to the guy that she finds following right along with him? He just made himself a target, but he didn't care. He went out and for God, and he didn't back down. So any comment on Elijah or how he got started and the sacrifice that he made?
I like to think that Elisha, he didn't leave anything to go back to. He burned everything up. Right. He was fully committed at that time. You've already brought that up. But that's just such a good point, you know. He didn't leave no desire to return back. He knew before he left, I ain't coming back, so I'm just going to sacrifice it all. I remember our pastor telling me one time, he said he was in Harlan County, and God had called him into the ministry. And after he got in the ministry of the Church of God, he was sent to East Bernstein, where our home church was at. And he told me one day, he said, Brother Lonnie, he said, I had a shed full of any kind of tool that you wanted. He said, anything you wanted to work with. He said, I worked in the mines up there. And he said, I had a good job. And it was, because mining paid real good. And he said, when God called me, he said, I left that mine and I loaded my car. And he said, I headed out. He said, I left every tool. I never did look back. He was giving me an example, because he knew they were calling on my life, kind of like Elisha, of what that it took, you know, to be fully dedicated to God. And he said, I just left it all. And he was such a dedicated pastor. I don't know, the only thing he ever wore out was 2 or 3 vehicles. He stayed there a good while. And he spent all that, he wore those vehicles out, going to his church congregation, the hospital, visiting, church building.
Yeah.
And we had a church running over too. But this man was fully dedicated, very good example. Sometimes it takes us a while to commit and get on board with that, but it's a good idea if we get in and do it.
Yeah. So it takes faith, determination, and yes, it'll take some sacrifice and willingness to get out of our comfort zone. So we talked about that before. So don't be complacent. Don't be lukewarm. So we got to get out of our comfort zone. Elijah didn't grow up as a prophet. He knew a lot about farming. He could do a lot of farming and knew that, but that would become useful. God again can use all the knowledge and that He's instilled in you from whatever your occupation is for His glory. So He can use everybody, and that's what He wants, to get everybody in. And one thing, we should always be led by God's Spirit. We talked about walking in the Spirit, so it's good that we want to pray and make sure we're doing the right thing, but don't be endlessly. The devil would like to get you stuck in the loop that, well, maybe I should do this, but it sounds like what I should do, but to put it off. We talked about that before. The devil just wants us to procrastinate. If we can put off doing good, the good doesn't get done. So go to God, pray, and get your confirmation, but don't be afraid to move forward. Don't just spend years saying, should I do right? The devil shows you something wrong, and we shouldn't be doing wrong, but when you see the right to do, always go to God, ask His guidance, but don't be stuck endlessly. Well, should the fleece be dry or should it be wet? Well, if it's wet, I want it to be dry. We've seen those examples in the Bible, but it's good to get confirmation, but don't wear it out. Any other comments on Elijah? If not, we'll go to now we're going to go to 1 Corinthians again. 1 Corinthians has a lot of great verses in there. We've been talking a lot about that, and we can't read that too much. Some of our extended studies, I've just been giving you some of the chapters in 1 Corinthians to read and study, and we've had some great teachings on that, and continue to ponder on that. So go back and reread it, go back and listen to the teachings, and let's all move up together and get closer to God. So we've got in 1 Corinthians in chapter 9 will be our lesson. If we backed up to chapter 8, we would see again a lot of the time that Paul spent in his letters to the churches was trying to correct problems or help head off problems that were happening. In Galatians, again, almost the whole book is pointed toward what the Judaizers were doing. Again, they were trying to tag something else that it took more than Jesus to get saved. And of course, Paul wouldn't stand for anything serious like that, so he didn't negotiate with them. But chapter 8 talks about people eating meat that had been sacrificed to idols. So technically, Paul makes the point that idols are nothing that didn't matter to him. Wouldn't hurt him whether he ate it or not. But at the end of that chapter, he says, wherefore if meat make my brother to offend, I will eat no flesh while the world standeth, lest I make my brother to offend. So he points out, even though he has the right to do it, he's not going to do it. He definitely wouldn't eat meat sacrificed to idols if somebody knew it, because it could offend some younger, inexperienced Christian. And he even says if eating meat at all would be an offense to him, I just wouldn't do it. So he didn't want to do anything that would offend people unless it was a serious breach, that they were sinning, like they would have been if they said Jesus is not enough to get saved. We need to become circumcised or do some other things to put with Jesus because he's inferior. But in chapter 9, he will talk about, he talks about giving. He talks about the church supporting apostles, which it was their standard thing that they supported apostles. But when Saul was in Corinth, he did set up the church. They spent a lot of time there, but he worked as a tent maker. So him and Barnabas, they worked, so they didn't take offerings from the church. He'll end up saying it because he didn't want to offend the church. But again, he's no longer there when he's writing the letter. So why is he writing the letter? Well, he's writing the letter to help the church so that they will support, whoever their ministers are. And so we can read it today, and we can, because God wanted it written. So we can know that it's right to support the churches, even though because Christ's work's got to get done. So, we got to have churches. Again, we've already talked about you can never outgive God. If you gave everything you had, we wouldn't be given enough, because that'd be the least we could do. But he doesn't require us to give all your money, but he does require all of something. And we keep saying that because it's that important. He requires you to love him completely, 100%, heart, mind, and soul. So we still got to give that, and that takes a lot of giving. It takes some effort. It's not just something that just happens. So we got to put a lot of effort and focus into that. So let's stay focused. But in the first few verses, the first three, Paul is making a point that he is actually an apostle. Again, he's seen the Lord. That was a requirement to be an apostle. Definitely the Corinthians knew that he was an apostle, because he had preached to them and he had established the church, and he said, you're a seal of mine. So, hey, our Christians, how'd y'all get there? Because you listened to me. So he makes the point that he's an apostle, and the reason that he does that is because there's some of the Corinthians, again, they were used to supporting apostles, but since Paul and Barnabas, they said, well, we don't, while they were there preaching, they said, they didn't take any of your help, we don't need your help. So they said, again, it's kind of messed up reasoning, but they said, well, if you was an apostle, then we'd support you, but since you didn't take our support, then you must not be an apostle. So that was the kind of circular, wrong reasoning that they were doing. But so Paul, again, that's the reason he starts out in chapter 9, making the point clearly that he is an apostle, and that's where we get into our verses, starting in verse 4. It says, have we not power to eat and to drink? Have we not power to lead about a sister, a wife, as well as other apostles, and as the brethren of the Lord, and Cephas? So again, he mentions Peter here, because Peter did have a wife, and it was customary that the apostles, they didn't go just for a one night sermon. They went to these cities and stayed there for months. Someone would even stay for a year. So they did when they went on these missions, they were serious about it. So they would take their wives with them, and the church would support them. And that's what he's saying in verse 4. He's saying we have the right to be supported, for the church to feed us, give us things to drink, to bring our wives so they'll be supported. He says, or I only and Barnabas have not we power to forbear working. So is it only us that you're not supporting? And again, this is after the fact, so we'll have to kind of read between the lines. Evidently, some people, even while they were there, maybe they were not, you could see that they were not as generous, they weren't cheerful givers, so we don't know, but Paul will make it a point that, he didn't take any of the money from them, but he's making his point, again, for the benefit of all that follow. It says, and he makes a point because he uses three types of work that people get support from. He says in verse 7, he says, who goeth a warfare at any time at his own charges? Who planteth a vineyard and eateth not of the fruit thereof? Or who feedeth the flock and eateth not of the milk of the flock? So he said, how many soldiers go to war and they provide their own gun and their own bullets and don't get paid for it? They expect that the army or the country that they're serving, they will take care of them. That's how he's pointing out, that's how it works. It's just normal. If you plant a vineyard and work in it, you'd expect that you're going to get some fruit from it. So again, and finally, if you're feeding a flock, you're going to get the milk from the flock. You'll get the wool, and of course you can have food to eat. So you're going to get some benefit out of it. So if you're working in your work, you'd expect to get some payment or some benefit out of it. And that's the point he makes. And he says, say I these things as a man, or saith not the law the same also? So then he says, well, if you don't, if this is not convincing enough that you should be supporting your ministers, let's go back to the Old Testament. Let's go back, see what God has written there. In verse 9 he says, for it is written in the law of Moses, thou shalt not muzzle the mouth of the ox that treadeth out the corn. Doth God take care for oxen? So he quotes a verse from the Old Testament, and this is what God said. God is concerned about his creation. We've already pointed that out, and God wanted to show his love and kindness for creation, so he said, well, and this was their custom. Again, the ox would go around usually in circles, treading out the stepping on the grain, knocking the kernels of grain off the stalks, and then they would throw it up in the air and blow off the chaff. And there's back to the threshing floor that we talked about that David bought this morning. So that was the process, but God ordered them not to put a muzzle on the ox where it just had to walk around and, ooh, that's a good looking grain there, and just walk over it all day. It could actually eat as it went along, so they didn't want to starve the ox. And that's the point, that the worker in the church, they shouldn't be doing all the work, walking in circles and going to visit and preaching and doing all they do without any compensation. And he does say, is this because God cares for the ox? He does, but he's making the point that he cares more for people. So he's making the point because guess what? Ox can't read, so they couldn't read this verse, or they couldn't have read back in the Old Testament the verse he was quoting from. So they didn't get the benefit from it. But he says it's for our sakes, no doubt, as it is written, that he that ploweth should plow in hope, and he that thresheth in hope should be partakers of his hope. So again, back to the farmer. They do the work, they plant and they plow. Why? Because they hope to get a return. They hope to get a harvest from it. Same thing, why do you thresh out the grain? Just so you can just let it lay there and get rained on and rot? No, you're going to, once you get it cleaned up, you're going to bag it up and you're going to save it, or you're going to ground it into meal, whatever grain it is, you're going to get some food to eat out of it. So there's going to be some benefit. And that's what he's pointing out spiritually, that the worker preaching the word of God in the church, the pastors, they should get taken care of. He says, if we have sown unto you spiritual things, it is a great thing if we shall reap your carnal things. So that would be your monetary blessings for the work they were done. But he says, if others be partakers of this power over you, are we not rather? Nevertheless, we have not used this power, but suffer all things, lest we should hinder the gospel of Christ. So again, he's pointing out that even though we have the right to compensation, he's saying we never took it from you because we didn't want to hinder the gospel. So Paul had the right idea. He was like, well, you can't accuse me of just preaching or setting up your church and spending all this time just for the money of it. He says if that's going to offend you, he didn't take the money, but his idea was if paying me would make me a better apostle or a better preacher, then pay me and I'll do it for that purpose. But it wasn't for the money, because again, they didn't want to, whatever they did, he didn't want to hinder the gospel. He wanted to make it grow. He wanted to make the churches grow. He wanted to make the church prosper. Yeah. So everything that Paul and Barnabas, again, they were unique in that they did support themselves, whereas a lot of the other people, they didn't work, but they didn't work a separate job. But again, it's plenty of work to be working for God and working in the church and getting the church to where it needs to be. So workers do deserve their hire. Any questions or comments on any of those verses?
Although Apostle Paul did not take, because he was dealing with the young church at that time.
Yeah.
Some of them struggled somewhat, but he knew he had liberties to receive from the church if necessary, and he supported that ideal to take care of your pastors and your laborers in the church. And Paul was just, as you say, unique. Him and Barnabas, they just loved to work and support themselves. They really didn't need to receive from the church, and that's a good idea too. Yeah. But equally as well, if we've got a pastor that is working for God and he's our pastor, our setup today, and even you can go all the way back to the priests, a little bit of the priests. Yeah. They were cared very well for because they received the tenth, of everything that came in. But that's always amazed me at Paul's dedication of that. I think a lot of it again had to do with a young church being started. So he was very generous for that young church and wanted to nurture it rather than to take from it so they could get established. Established pretty good today, to take care of that.
So we want to make sure that we always, again, we've already said you can't outgive God. I can definitely verify that we can't outgive God. So whatever you give, God doesn't need it, but he'll show his appreciation because you'll either get blessings actually get double blessings. You'll be blessed on earth, but really you're laying up treasures in heaven. So that's what'll count. Because when we're no longer here, you know, you could have saved up, you know, $500,000. You could have gold bars stacked up in your basement, but once you die, that won't do any good. You know, it might do, somebody else might like it. They probably fight over it, might come in to steal it, but it won't do you any good. But that's what Paul's pointing out when he quotes Deuteronomy 25:4, and that is where the law of Moses did prohibit muzzling that ox as he was working, doing his threshing of the crops. So then going into those last verses there, again he points out that what we do for God, the worker deserves the hope. They've got, you know, really what are we working for? We're working to the Great Commission. We want to see people saved. Elijah, again, he was feeling kind of down and out because he didn't, you know, he thought, well, it's down to me. You know, everybody else has been killed off, and Queen's out to get me, so it's looking kind of dim. You know, sometimes the devil will make things look dim, but God did show him the light, and now Paul in the New Testament, he's pointing out that, you know, he wants this church, he wants all the churches to prosper. You know, these churches that he's helped set up, he may not be around, and he wasn't prideful. He didn't care if somebody else came along and do some work. You know, let Apollos, you know, I can plant, somebody else, Apollos can come along and water it, but God's going to give the increase. So he understood what that love would do in the churches, and he just wanted to make sure that he didn't hinder the work in any way. So he's saying just because you have a right to do something, don't mean that you have to. So he also, you know, pointed that out. So he was sowing some great spiritual seeds, and there was going to be a harvest that's going to be reaped. But again, he wasn't doing it for the money. That's how people sometimes mess up. You know, when people get really successful, even church people, they can get really successful, and then they can say, well, now I'm making a lot of money. So when you get I in there, that's where the problem is. Again, we should be working for God and not be concerned about those temporal things, because God will take care of us. We've got to keep that in mind. But even Jesus pointed out this need to respect the workers when he sent out the apostles. In Luke 10:7, he says, and in the same house remain, eating and drinking such things as they give, for the laborer is worthy of his hire. Go not from house to house. So he's telling his disciples, you know, you don't have to go begging, because I'm going to take care of you. Just go in the house, and they'll feed you and give you plenty to drink. They'll take care of you. So while they're in that city, he prepared for them. And in Matthew 10:10, he tells them not to take these things. He says, nor script for your journey, neither two coats, neither shoes, nor yet staves, for the workman is worthy of his meat. So he's again telling us not to worry. He doesn't say don't plan and don't work and don't save for your retirement, but he's saying, you know, save for the things that's important, because he's gonna, if you're out working for God, you're not gonna starve. He's gonna take care of you. So that's the confidence that he gives us, and that's again, I think that's what Paul was doing. He was not for himself, I don't think at all. When he was given, you know, God told him what to write there, but he pointed out, you know, this is what you didn't do for me, but I had a right to. We had a right to receive it, as other ministers after me will. So we've learned several things about giving. So going back, we saw King David. He said, I'm not going to make an offering unless it costs me something. So even though the things was already given to him for the offering that God wanted, he said, if it doesn't cost me, then I'm not going to give it. So again, offering, the word sacrifice, if you're not given something, then you're not sacrificing anything. If you watch somebody else make an offering, he's pointing out that, you know, it's not an offering unless I paid for it. And that was under the law, that's what they were doing. They were sacrificing animals because the bloodshed was required. But now Jesus, what did he do? He paid the price. So it still cost. It cost him. But he's already paid all that price, and that's what we got to be thankful and we got to love him for, because it's a price that we couldn't afford. It was just, you know, when Solomon made that, they sacrificed so many oxen and sheep just to sanctify the temple before they brought in the ark that they couldn't even count them. And it shows in 2 chapters over that they sacrificed 122,000 oxen, and I think it was 120,000 sheep after the temple was all together. The ark was in there during the rest of the 7-day feast. They sacrificed that many, so that was a lot of counting. It takes a lot to count 120,000 sheep and keep a tally of them. So just think that means it was a lot more that they sacrificed again to make the temple holy, to get it cleansed, to make sure that it was sanctified before they brought in the ark, because that was God's presence. It represented God's presence. So if you want God's presence in our church, what we must do some sacrificing. We must get our little inner temples of ourselves holy, and get the church cleaned up, and that's when God's glory will come down. Amen. We can see that cloud come down. Might even see the fire come down, but we'll definitely feel the Spirit, and we'll feel those gifts of the Spirit working in the church. So it all ties together. And then we also figured out from Elijah. Here's Elijah going to follow right in Elijah's footsteps. And again, he made sure that when he made his sacrifice, he was saying, "I'm not turning back." He could have. He didn't say, "Let me go get my ox over and put him in the barn and put my plow in the shed so it won't rot or get rust." Again, he says, "I'm going to sacrifice these things right here so that there won't be any turning back." So he showed his wholehearted commitment to serve God and to follow God's prophet, and he became a great prophet. But Romans 12:1, it says that we're to present ourselves a living sacrifice. So we have some sacrificing to do all the time. And how do we do that? We walk in the Spirit and keep yourselves clean. We got to stay away from sin. That's our responsibility. Else we're not making that living sacrifice. Actually, somebody read Romans 12:1. Read that whole verse.
Romans 12, what?
12:1.
12:1?
Yeah.
I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service.
Amen.
So there it is. There, it's almost the same words. The least you can do, it's your reasonable service to present your body a living sacrifice, but it's got to be wholly acceptable to God. And how are we going to be acceptable to God? Is if we are cleaned up, we're sanctified, and we're holy, and we're again, we may still mess up and commit a sin, but then we'll be like David. We're going to confess it quickly, and we're going to do what God says to take care of it. So we're going to ask forgiveness, and we're going to get it taken care of, and we're not going to fall back into that. Why? Because it disappoints God. It doesn't show him love and respect. That's our reasonable search, to do what he says, to love him 100%. And also, we talk about monetary support. Support goes well beyond finances. It can include prayer, encouragement. We need a love to foster unity in the body of Christ. So showing love in action, again, that's our reasonable service. All those things is what God commands. So if we're not doing what God commands, then are you presenting your living sacrifice? Is it acceptable to God? Is God going to accept it? If God hadn't accepted David's sacrifice on the threshing floor, then he wouldn't have sent down the fire to show his acceptance. He wouldn't have told the angel to put up his sword. The plague would have gone on, and a lot more people would have died. So make sure that when we do our sacrificing, we're actually given out of our heart, and he knows it, and he will know, because he knows our heart. So we don't have to prove our heart, but we must be working to show our heart. He doesn't. Again, God already knows your heart, but he still demands, our sacrifice. Go out and do good. Even the Great Commission, is that something easy to do? There's work to be done there.
That's the way we feel he seeks it.
That's right.
Through the Great Commission.
That's how we do it. So again, we got to be out there working. You say, "Well, I can't do that." Well, I'm sure every day you run into somebody, and most of us around here know how to talk right. So sometimes it's just giving that encouraging word, inviting them to church, telling them something great God did for you. You've got lots of ways to do it, but are we just sitting around? Because the devil's going to tell you not to do it. He's going to say, "I don't say that here because somebody might hear you. They might think you're a Christian." And again, the devil doesn't say it exactly that way, but again, it's what he's telling you. They're going to think, you might be one of those people to go to the church of God, why are you so concerned about me? Well, it's just love, but, don't listen to the devil, but listen to God. That's what we gotta do. We gotta listen to God and making the devil flee from us. Any other comments, questions?
Yeah, Brother Randy, Paul, it's such a good lesson on that. I got so much out of it. I had to think of Paul, he felt obligated somehow to the church because he persecuted the church so strong. Well, I think that's one reason that he chose to be a giver instead of a receiver in that. He addressed that in many places. He'd say, I'm the least of the apostles. I'm not worthy to be called an apostle. I persecuted it. He even delivered them up to the sentence of death, and some of them died. This man had been through a lot. But when you read the history of Paul, we find him collecting for the poor saints everywhere he goes. So he was a giver. He wanted to give and contribute back because he felt like that he had done a disservice to the church, and that was his way, I think, of helping his making it made him feel better. He didn't have to do it, but it done him good to do that.
Good. So he was an example of a cheerful giver. So that's what he was. He was a cheerful giver. And that's what we should be, because guess what? God's given us so much that we've got, if you can't see how much you need to be given back, we didn't do what Paul did. So we didn't go help get Christians, crucified and thrown in jail. But we've done plenty of bad that we could never pay for it. But Jesus paid the price because he could. So now is our time to be paying back. Have a great one.
Amen.